my computer. Okay. All right. So here we are. And back we go again. Church directories, rural directories, cookbooks, schools, and more. Finding your rural ancestors, or candidly, even in a large city, we've used this same thing, especially with different kinds of ladies' aid projects and Red Cross projects, especially in World War I and II. They are hugely rich for you in terms of your family if you haven't looked for information there. So my goal, first of all, with you is to expand your horizon of potential resources and sources, and also to continually expand your knowledge of what is out there. If we don't expand our knowledge, then it's not enough to say, but I know how to go get knowledge. If you're learning and you're learning new knowledge, sometimes it will connect and take you to many other places, and it's going to really help you. So we begin this with the idea that we're not going to be able to look everywhere. We're out in a rural area, which in Montana, if you're not aware of it, 16 of our counties in Montana are still noted by the U.S. Census Bureau as pioneer counties, meaning less than one person per square mile. And so there's special conditions there when you're trying to figure out what will you do. We're going to take a fast look at types of basic resources when those pickings look bare, or you say, I've looked everywhere, but boy, I'm not finding anything about my family. And you'll always recognize there's going to be some low-hanging fruit that are going to exist for a few things online. But remember that places like MyHeritage, Find My Past, Ancestry, Fold3 are still just doing the big, what I call the more obvious pieces of low-hanging fruit, getting the birth, marriage, and deaths if they can find them, or other things. So you have to look for community context stuff. And I emphasize this to you. It is community context. You might find a little, but most everything is up for a look, and it usually exists right in that community. But when you're saying, hey, help, my family is in Ferndale, Montana, and there were only ever 40 families there at the time they were there. What can I do? There's no official information. You can look for the stuff that we might call it unofficial, but I'm going to tell you, other people in the community thought it was tremendously official, at least to them. So your strategy is going to be that you use various kinds of search and fan club clues. That's your strategy. My goal is to find the friends, neighbors, and acquaintances who are going to help me to solve community situations. Because if you're in a rural situation, like say those 16 rural counties in Montana that are still designated as pioneer, you need your friends for fire protection. You need the neighborly friendships just to, if you need help with your corral, or you need a brief help for something like a barn building, which they used to do a lot of, or even helping to build a chicken house, or you're roofing and you need help because a storm's coming up. You need to record those friendships, record everyone that you see, start lists. And that's what I'm asking you to do. Record how the friendships expand as the community needs become more apparent. It wasn't too long before any lady was in an area where she said, hey, I need friends. I need connections. And so if it came through Ladies Aid, or it came through a neighborhood club, or it came just as friends that were within a 10-mile radius, or somebody who would be down at the school, then that person became, by need even, a friendship. Make a list of anybody who belonged to formally organized groups. In my Ferndale community that I'm researching for a book, the big things are first of all, what was the rural fire department, and today it encompasses 100 square miles. So there's lots of people. And also the local ladies group. You identify those just as I did. When my grandpa Lee came to Ferndale, Montana in 1937-38, and he needed a little bit of help. Or who did he go to help others? There will be a way to expand your community story with useful context, and you'll even be able to write about it. And that's a very important thing. So when you are looking for your ancestors' fan club, that is friends, acquaintances, and neighbors, we usually only begin to look at these when we hit that brick wall. I urge you, as you find friends that are mentioned with your particular ancestor or ancestor's family, record those names right now. You're going to use them in this thing called cluster research that we all do. And having a fan club, recognizing it, identifying the people is a big part of cluster research. So these fan club members have interactions with each other defined usually by specific events. Maybe it's that barn raising or the card clubs they had or the game nights they had at the school in order to put a nickel in a piece and raise money for school equipment, or community teams that they might have had through later 4-H, school support activities, or even I found one in my community that was just heavenly. I thought it's called Smoothing the Roads for the School Bus when the road grader didn't appear. And it was springtime in Ferndale and the roads were in terrible condition. And the school bus, honest to goodness, could not get down to the end of Ferndale North for several days, thus meaning kids had to walk a couple of miles up to meet the school bus. It's who rounded up clothing and household stuff for those who needed it. Those AIDS societies, those women's societies, it's cluster research in a very different way. Sometimes you'll see it in the newspaper. It won't always be, there all the time. It'll be peripheral, but you might find it. But you need to find out what people belonged to. Cluster research uses things such that if you want to solve a problem and find the social history of a community and find out who your great grandpa's friends were or the persons he trusted, or when you run out of direct evidence, like your tax notices or those various things where they had to put money into the pot to the local government, in order to do that reasonably exhaustive look, you need to look beyond those things. In my opinion, the cluster is family, and the fan members become like family also. So it uses family and non-family people to learn context of situations and places and to get to those friends. Now, I'm going to tell you something about those friends. Maybe and I know he didn't, my grandpa never wrote any memories down. But when I went to do a story about him and his driving, guess what? I got all kinds of information from people who had heard it from their ancestors as to what Oscar L. Lee's driving abilities were like. They were horrible. I was able to do a story because guess what? A couple of those people had written tongue-in-cheek things in the local newspaper, and that brought up other memories of other people. So if you're going to get into the rural fan clubs, you have to think what available sources are. You're going to run out of those things immediately, especially if your family was in a place in a rural area, but they only ever rented. Thus, they may have paid personal taxes, difficult to find those, but they didn't pay land taxes. So you don't have that source. You might have some road receipts, mainly. Mainly you might have a will, but probably not. You might find a probate. You might find some yearbooks that record their kids. Don't just think, well, that's the kids and I'll get to them later. Record those people now. In my last session a month ago, I talked to you about school census reports and all the things that you can find that the local school has recorded about that community. And they record a bunch of things in there, not just the school census. They record those teachers. They record the people who go down and start the fire in the wood fire each morning down at the school. They record all of those people. So you can literally look at that stuff and find what your family did or what others were doing around them. If you find that your family didn't participate in that at all, boy, that's a big mysterious question mark for you in terms of what was happening to them. Get into looking next door at someone else's stuff, at someone else's will, at someone else's probate, because someone in that local fan club in that rural area kept stuff. And you know what stuff I mean. Maybe it was local newspapers. Maybe it was the jottings of that particular person about an event. Um, I just wonder what all of us, and I'm assuming you all were alive then, I believe in 1980, 81, when Mount St. Helens went off and we were covered in this area with ash. I know I wrote a memory. I'm hoping you did. If you didn't, when you get off the air today, write a memory of what you remember about it. Or say, well, I wasn't there, but I heard blah, blah, blah. Look for rural ephemera. These are items of memorabilia. They're typically written or printed. Maybe it's that ad that they posted down on the telephone post for somebody's auction, because all the auction papers didn't necessarily make it to the newspapers. They just put out things or put up a handwritten sign or whatever. Someone may have saved these. They're expected to only have short-term usefulness or popularity, but people save them. Trust me, we have people who walk in here at least a couple of times a year with huge boxes of newspapers saying, my granny saved these, and they haven't been through the box. And we can point out to them that we may have the newspapers, we probably do, but in between, there's going to be neat things. There's going to be calendars. And some of those calendars from your grandparents, if they saved them, have scribblings on them for someone's birthday because they were going to make a birthday cake. Honest to goodness, my grandma was famous for that. Garage sales for a sign, family paper collections that people have put in, or if you're thinking across the United States or across the world, in the United States, we have a thing called History Portal that is connected most generally through our state historical societies, pardon me, available for most of the U.S. states. And it's a place where people can actually copy those items or make sure that they're electronically available, and they are parked there and they can be quite useful to you. When I look at Ferndale, I always stop to take a look at all the stuff for Swan Lake and Big Fork, because I enlarged my area and said there weren't very many people around there, so I better be looking at their stuff too. I'm going to show you some of the things that I think are quite helpful. So some of the rural sources of information that I've found that are wonderful: community cookbooks, especially to identify the females. Remember, frequently the family in early directories, county directories, they're identified by the man, and only sometimes after about 1910 or 11 are they identified with the woman there too. It becomes more prevalent, and women are better identified in those directories after about 1920, when those voting rights came in. Don't ask me why they decided women were suddenly legitimate. I don't know, but you will see it. But early on, you may not see them. University extension agents and their extension clubs. Frequently, it would be the women who joined those, unless it happened to be something where you were looking at an electric co-op. But frequently, you'll find Mr. and Mrs. Jones there too. And sometimes they'll even tell you that her name was Hortense. Farm directories are good for you. School records, like those district clerk records and those teacher registers, will get you the whole family. Remember, 0 to 21, those school censuses record everyone, including the parents. The school reunion celebrations and books. And boy, are we always happy for those when we get those in our library, because we are the collection point for this county for all reunion celebrations, school and community celebrations, not just the school reunions. The brand books, they're very important because they'll also frequently record the address, or at least the area. They will record not just one brand, but your family might have had 4 or 5, depending on the type of animal or the types of things that they were doing. The card clubs, see those newspapers because those were informal and ever changing. I know I was talking in a gab session this last week, and people were mentioning that in World War II, what would you do in Great Falls to identify those people who were living up at a very secure, who were, pardon me, working up at the very secure area uh, when we had our biggest business, Anaconda Company. Well, I could tell people, hey, you want to see everybody for every department? Look at the bowling scores each week in the newspaper. They were recorded and they were recorded by their department. So it's another way. Here you go again, another way to see those families. Remember, if the guy was there, frequently the family is there, and you can see who his friends were in those bowling clubs because that's who he's bowling with. The church societies and the Red Cross list during World War I and World War II times, those were big. So here's one that I found a couple of years ago locally here, Cooking with Friends of the Gulch. And if you're not aware of where the Gulch is, it's connected with 7 small rural communities out kind of east and south of Great Falls. The women's clubs, the brand books, that's who did the brand books in our area. And frequently you will find that they've done many other things too to record history. So looking at all of those rural places, you need to expand your research beyond the immediate ancestor. That's what the besties and these fan clubs are about. If you just do that immediate ancestor, you're ignoring some great information you could get from their friends. Even if your ancestor did not write anything about his friends or her friends, I guarantee you in that community, someone else wrote about them. You won't just find them in newspapers. You might find them down at the local library or the Historical Society, recorded as a one-of-a-kind memoir written by those folks. I use Roots Magic software, and right now, the latest thing for it, I love it because it allows me not just to do my ancestral lines and not just to do my relatives, but I get to record all my friends and neighbors in the database too, separately, of course. And I can put them in groups and enter all who belong. So I've got those fan club members there. When I was doing Ferndale, it's tiny and tiny, especially up through the 1960s. But I found all my Grandpa Lee's buddies and helpmates and friends. I didn't find them from him. I found them by looking at the rural route first in the directories and looking to see who had to be along that rural route. I didn't find my grandma's friends that way either. I had to look in church and school directories. And the very best Ferndale lists that I've been compiling are those people, virtually everyone joined the volunteer fire department. It just was expected, and you did it, and you participated and took care of your fellow neighbors. And the Ferndale Sewing Circle, which is well over 100 years old. I call them my groupies, not because they're groupieing with me, but because we have reciprocity and I'm groupieing with them. I've been able to find out a great deal about that little community that I didn't know because, hey, I was only a kid there till and I left when I was 14. You have to begin collecting though. If you don't, you'll never get it started. So I found out some things about my grandpa. He belonged to the Hard Times Club in Havre. He tried to start one in Ferndale, but there's only one reference to it, so it didn't go. But I found his name there in the newspaper. I found him in the school trustee stuff. I found him in the volunteer fire department. He wasn't attending any church, but grandma did. So I could at least look at that and say, he didn't attend, but she did. I used grandma's clubs. I used the Ferndale Sewing Circle and the Catholic Church nearest, which happened to be Summers, some 20 some miles away. I started collecting names, and when I collected names, I collected what they were, that they lived in town, and if I found them in a certain time in 1938 when they got there, I recorded in parentheses 1938, and then as I found them again, I recorded them later. So I started lists for myself then of the Ferndale Fire Department Sewing Circle lists. I could then look at their news articles. I'm supposed to get to look at the minutes of the meetings this summer for the Sewing Circle, and I'm really looking forward to that. I looked at fire stories and new persons in the community because I could find those in censuses, or, somebody said, we're going to have a party for the newlyweds because they're just getting started. And so that Ferndale Sewing Circle always came in and provided basic stuff for those families. I looked at all the people who looked at and signed the Rural Fire District petition before they ever became official. How was I able to find that? Well, down at the county, but I had to ask for it. It wasn't something that was out there. So I had to go root and dig for that one. The sewing circle, and I noticed that the same NISTs were on all the lists, and in Ferndale so far, I haven't found one person who was isolated. You're going to collect, first of all, then names, first and last. Get that woman's name from the school census. Don't just say, well, I guess I'll only ever know her as Mrs. Everhard. Put down the location and the date of a contact, whatever was there. Where did they go? Because the date is really important. Suddenly, in 1941 in Ferndale, there were two Mrs. Lees because my mom moved there. So now there was Mrs. Mary Lee, but she'd just been called Mrs. Lee, and there was Mrs. Inez Lee, my mom. So you want to get their first names if you can, and you could always go to the censuses. It will fill those contexts in for you. And the source. Where did you get it and when? When did you do these notes? Who interacted and why? You're going to be surprised at what you collect. Here's my Roots Magic group making thing that just says I can look at all the different group functions and combine or manipulate multiple groups. I haven't had to do the multiple groups yet because it's been largely male or female, but if I have to with a church group, I know I can do that. I'm just alerting you to the fact that there is standardized software out there that's very inexpensive so that you can use and keep track of these things, and you don't have to have them on a million small notes where you lose track of the information eventually. So let me show you. Here's one that I've got. She's not my relative. She was Marge Moose Balstead. Her folks were some of the first settlers. The Moose family were some of the first settlers. And she married Dave Balstead, who came to the community. So in my set of records, I have her with her middle name. I have her spouse. I have her parents recorded, but I'm able to record all the groups and things that she did. Hey, she was a 4-H leader. She was a school clerk for 30 years. She was in the Ferndale Sewing Circle, and she was there virtually every meeting, I think. She was in the Home Demonstration Club, too. She belonged to the Lutheran Ladies' Aid, and she did Red Cross training. I could go on and on. Oh, by the way, she was down at the school canning also in that informal group that made sure that there was always canned food available to all those kids in that little Ferndale school. So this is the kind of information you can collect and keep. And she was not in my family, but I can tell you, she and her husband were close friends of both of my grandpas, and also for my mom and dad. Here's another place in the state, in Harlowton. I was able to do a 276-page book of just newspaper articles of my husband's family. I was doing it to kind of give him a Christmas present 20 some years ago, but to also record and learn about his family. And it was really interesting to be able to learn about that family because I could snip and clip things and find all these ancillary members of the Thomson family in Harlowton. Mrs. Gordon husband and her son John were at the W.C. Husbands homes. Well, yeah, because that was her parents, I think. And so they were cousins. I could look at all these and I could promptly see with the Wednesday evening bridge party who the friends were for everybody. So it's another way for you to get those people. And then you can take that contact and say, did the W.C. Husbands, being that he was a district judge, did they ever write memoirs? Oh, yes, they did. Or did Mrs. Box write anything? She was a local landowner. Nope, she was just in several things, but she was in Eastern Star with my husband's great grandma. Let's see if I can move this. Suddenly, guys, I'm not able to move. I'm going to see if I have to go back. And okay, some rural sources. Here we go. So let's take a look at some of these. Here's a little one I just found from Phillips County, Montana. This little rural school, Tallow Creek, was established in 1931. The people got together in 2002, made a cookbook that combined the best of rural history with some pretty neat recipes. They did things. This is what's different about this cookbook. They also recorded the people in an index at the end. However, when I looked at it, it was only the people who had contributed recipes. So we're going back to push more people in. You're going to find these at yard sales. And I would be looking anytime you go into an area, to say, okay, what have these folks done? I've got relatives that I just found out in Washington, didn't know about them even. And I'm going to be looking at these same things because they were in Puyallup. I am going to assume that there were kinds like this of things there, and I'm going to go looking for them. This little book has more than 100 names in it without things like this. Here's a memory from a page. This woman, Margene Ora Hood Carnahan, went all the way through 8th grade and records all of her teachers there. Wow. And she has a neat little story. The time that the teacher, Miss Kruger, set her alarm clock during the noon hour so she could take a nap, one of the boys took a stick and pushed the alarm down, so he played for the good part of that afternoon while she slept. So you're going to see neat things like this in these books. Next one from Nyoka, she was only at that school for a little bit of time, but she records the fact that she had to drive herself to school without supervision because that's how you got to school when you lived a long ways away. Here's Jane Clausen, who taught at Tallow Creek in 68 through 71. And she only had 4 students, Patty and Nancy, Leo, and Chris. But she had wonderful memories. She says, one spring day, we heard the birds singing, the creeks running, so we decided to go on a science nature walk. Actually, we were playing hooky. Now, this is from the teacher's point of view. We heard car horns honking and realized it was past time for school to get out. The parents had come to pick up their kids and to find the schoolhouse empty, and they became quite concerned. As we came crawling over the fence, I was really quite embarrassed. So you get these neat memories when you look at some things like this. This is just a treasure chest full of things. And believe me, it's going to be recorded and it's going into our county books here as fast as I complete the rest of the index, because this is going to be a fabulous thing. It actually, when you look at some of the items in here, it covers everything from the beginning of that school, but it also refers to people who were there before the school was ever started. That's really great. Let's look at cooking with Friends of the Gulch out here just a few miles from Great Falls. The authors of this cookbook intended that the best recipes from the Gulch were to be remembered, and especially the people who gave them freely as a means to raise money for local community needs. And this Gulch is southeast of Great Falls, comprising the small towns of Tracy, Sand Coulee, the town of Number 7. Ever heard of that one? Centerville and Stockett. And all the different nationalities and so on that were out there. And this cookbook really reflects all the different Eastern European nationalities in terms of its recipes. So it is a real treasure. But you can see that, Marilyn Chartier from Sand Coulee is there. So at the time, if you have recorded the book as sometime in the early 1990s, Marilyn was still living there. Bonnie Culver was over in Sand Coulee also. Claire Del Guerra was their home extension agent in Great Falls, but she had also come from out there. And so you've got Marvine Ronig from Stockett. Well, you can immediately make a pretty neat directory out of that when all you had to look at before were men's names in the directory, or a rural route that said Mr. and Mrs. Ronig lived in rural route number 1. I have indexed this one, and I encourage you to give back to your community. It did not take long to index it. I just used Word to do it because I wanted it to be in the simplest format possible. But This was 1993 when they did it. I picked it up a few years ago. I guess in 2024 it says, and made an index that has the index of all those who contributed recipes, plus their references to their families as to who was there. And, sometimes I would say, okay, GF means Great Falls, or SC means Sand Coulee, and so on. But it's indexed, it's in our library as a legitimate one-of-a-kind text for you. Here's another one from the parishioners, friends, and neighbors of St. Mary's Church out at Rainsford, about 45 miles from Great Falls, with the people. Look at this. All the local people who were recorded right there at that particular time. It's an index. This is in 1978. So there were 22 members of their altar society and counting. And by the way, they didn't care that it was for the Catholic Church Altar Society. Oh my. There are people from various churches there, a little Bible community church. They all participated. And inside, I discovered that even though they had the names at the beginning, this particular recipe recorded the names of 4 more people there, Chris and Pam and Debbie and Lynn, because they weren't in that original list. So you're going to find wonderful things. Don't forget what I told you a month ago, that local school census report that has the name of the child, the age, the date of birth, the name of the dad, the name of the mom or the guardian. And by the way, the state law right from 1900 has said that the woman's first name needs to be recorded. So you have a very good chance of finding that woman's first name. And this rule is pretty much uniform code across the United States. So look for it in other states too. I'm just saying, these are good things. And you will not find these at Ancestry. You're not going to find them at Find My Past or other places. Or if you do, let me know. So the trustees and the clerks are all recorded. So you've got another opportunity here from 1915 through at least 1920 with the list you could see here to record people who thought enough of their community to take time to participate. So you've got other people to add to your big long list of people who are in that community. They are going to be your friends and neighbors and your acquaintances. Fort Benton, for example, has a variety of these cookbooks, always from a broad range of territory. And it really reflects the fact that Fort Benton was the place to go. It was the county seat. But Fort Benton, if you're not aware of it, Choteau County was one of the original 6 counties in Montana. And so it encompassed a whole bunch of those rural environments I'm talking about, and they never had the idea that they would just do something in Fort Benton. So the Choteau County District Hospital Country Cookbook of 1970, I could do this one, and I'm telling you, people were from Geraldine, Big Sandy, Loma, Highwood. Everybody helped one another, and they identified people by this was Grandma Conlon's, this was whatever. So you got some big ideas from it. There are Grange recipes, and the Grange was a farming society across the United States for a long time. You'll find these everywhere. And I could not do it with this particular Grange recipe book because the page was torn out after I bought it too. But this one was 1971 in a smaller, in Woodland, California. But I do know that the names of male and female who belong to the Grange are always in there for anything that they do. Hey, another place. Or if you don't find your family in that Grange thing, then you know they weren't a member. That's valuable to know also. You'll see things like a Park family reunion. This is one that I found not long ago with just strictly recipes in it. I was hoping for family stories, but it did give me the names, at least, of the people who appeared for that reunion. That was pretty good. First ladies cookbooks. Most states have them. And if you're looking and saying, hey, I had a person in my family, maybe they weren't governor, they were in the works as an attorney general, or at a county level, they were a county commissioner or whatever, you should look for these because they were asked commonly to do these across states. And as they were asked to do it, you're going to find all kinds of information that you did not expect. Like this one, the Montana pioneer families are in here. And so here's a nice little article on Wilson Butts, who built Helena's pioneer cabin in the fall of 1864. And here's who moved in. Here's a description of that particular cabin. Now, would we necessarily expect to find that in a cookbook? No, but what a neat thing. And yeah, I've shown you this before, the catalog of the Helena graded schools for the years. And what it is, it's a guide or an overview of what schools were available to people in Helena in 1879 and 1880. In Great Falls here, we have Malmstrom Air Force Base, and it would surprise you to find out, or maybe it wouldn't, that some of their addresses are necessarily classified. And so unless you live off base, you're not going to find the people who live on base. But when you begin to look at things like a recipe book, and you know that the Officers' Wives Club did it, you're going to get both the officers on base and off base. And believe it or not, some chose to live on base still. And it's also going to lead you to other things that maybe something like Malmstrom's history place will have for you. I warn you, all of these things are going to be one of a kind, really, really published in a limited fashion. But wherever you can begin to reconstruct names for your family, that's important because there's their friends. Here's a collection from the United Methodist Churches of Great Falls and Sun River, Montana. And so you begin to get these people. And if you're familiar and you look at a directory, you're saying, oh, well, Dolly Collins was the wife of Gerald or whatever. And so now I've got that connection, but I have proof that she did other things and participated in other things. So I should go to the United Methodist records, such as they are, to see if I could find more. Here's a C.M. Russell Museum cookbook. These I love, the Centennial Homecomings. Big Sandy has had one every 10 years for years and years in what I call the off years. And they do wonderful things. They do a schedule of events so you can tell exactly what went on because your family might have been there. So you can write a whole story and say, on Friday, they probably attended and went to registration at the Big Sandy High School Annex, met their friends there, and got homecoming books. And I wonder, my grandma was really good at singing, so I wonder if she participated in that choral practice at 7 in the evening. Or were they the king or the queen? You can write a whole story around this schedule of events. Pretty neat stuff. Or they do things like, here are all the following deceased alumni, faculty, and friends since our last homecoming 10 years ago. Wow. Because they didn't care where they lived. They got hold of those things, and it's just one of the best kept things for, these are the family who have died that used to be here. So you've got grads, you've got non-grads here, you've got faculty, people who have died. So what a thoughtful thing that they have done. Chester, Montana. Liberty County is very, very rural. It's one of those 16 counties I was talking to you about that does not have at least 1 mile, one person per square mile officially. But they put together a spectacular book with an index showing the pictures, the people, the dates of graduation, other facts, and people who did not actually graduate, but they were there anyway. I'm going to tell you, 2000 is already one generation ago. So you begin to collect these. They're very valuable. Where can you maybe find a copy of these? In a rural library, you might see these. In the rural historical societies that are usually only open in the summer, you might find some of these, but you're going to have to look very carefully and ask. If you don't ask, they're not going to tell you about their cookbook. I mean, why would you want to see a cookbook? Well, because you do. At first, you're going to be like me and just take the name of the person you want. And then you're going to realize, hey, this is the Fandangle, the fan club, the friends, acquaintances, and neighbors. And I need those for my story. Here's Miles City in 1987. Here's the class of 37 on their 50th class reunion doing a memories book, which was very cool, and including, by the way, even all the people who did not graduate. So you've got a chance to find Aunt Jane, who only had the opportunity to go through the sophomore year. Do not ignore these. Look everywhere. Or the ranch directories. Not as prevalent today. We've collected everything we can, and I will tell you a few of these across the state can be found out at our Montana Memory Project out at the State Society. But you will find directories, and when you find them, you're going to find some pretty neat information in these because they also record the land that the person has at that time. Or maybe you want to get a hold of the current landowner's book. Minnesota and Iowa are famous for these in terms of still continuing to publish landowner books every year out in those rural areas. So when you're looking at those, look at the possibilities. So here's the farmers and ranchers in Cascade County. And so it records that the Elk Ridge Livestock Company with an address of Cascade has 7,360 acres. And it at least will give you a reference point in terms of being able to find where the acreage is. And sometimes it will even tell you where the females are, etc. Here's over in the second column, it says here's May Fetzko et al., meaning and others out at Stockett. So here's your family. Here they are. Don't just look for that one name. Look around you to see what it is. This gives you the opportunity to see where these are. And so you can look for that particular place in terms of its federal designations for land. And you can find the friend next to them. Or this wonderful Chico Cemetery, 1864 to 2014 book by Carol Woodley, who not only said she was going to do the cemeteries, we've gone out and taken pictures and done things, but that woman, I'll go back, that woman actually in this book has done a brief biography of every person she found. You will find people who are driven to do wonderful, insane things like that, so don't ignore them. And again, Chico is sitting in a place that is remarkably rural still. Yes, it has big names living around it down near Livingston, but you're going to be surprised to find the things that you can find out about that when Chico was just nothing but a railroad station 70, 80 years ago. And that's what you want. And look at this, 1864. That'll tell you some clues about who came there first and when. So you'll find things like this. University of Montana and Montana State University and any other university in the United States has graduate papers. They have theses and dissertations. Go out and look at that university within that state to find the theses and dissertations that are about memories or histories or whatever. Here's a little ghost town called Coloma. It was a Montana ghost town, but they were looking by sorting things that they found in the dump about the mining and daily life experiences. You're going to be able to find out some things about that area and who lived there in that brief 8 or 10 year period when people are around. Now, if your family had a gold miner or had people who followed a gold miner, then you're going to be interested in these just so you can go find the next one. And you're going to want to look then at all the possible kinds of things like this, because people have gone after that history long after we think the sources are gone. And you're going to find local sources in that list of things that have been done. Or maybe you're even as crazy as I am and you'll index some of these if you find lots of names. Here's a Flaxville High School all-class reunion from 29 through 73. In 1973, they did this thing, and so they've got everybody. Now, Flaxville's another really, really tiny place, but you're going to find these particular things, and they are very, very important. By the way, if you find some of these and you take it for a while, or you look and you say, you might think also of our Great Falls Genealogy Society Library, because we are the major collector for all of these things. And guess what? We even collect from the counties contiguous to the Montana borders, like in Canada and in Idaho and in Wyoming and North and South Dakota, because we know how important those are. And we know that people actually cross those borders to go to card parties, to go to school and whatever. So we collect those too. So here's the thing. Here's a whole little thing. Somebody took whatever they wrote down at Flaxville and said, okay, here's Betty Lou Guy, who married a young. She's living in Pocatello, Idaho. She attended MSC and Great Falls, taught grade school 1.5 years, got married in 52, went to Honolulu. After a transfer to San Diego, they had 4 children. And then he was discharged. I mean, you're going to find the family history here in Nothing Flat, plus that really neat contact back to Flaxville. Local visitor guides. Fort Benton is small, but that whole area publishes every year a visitor's guide and business directory that takes in all of these communities: Fort Benton, Big Sandy, Geraldine, Loma, Highwood, Carter, Belt. It even takes things from Great Falls. But it will at least tell you in that period of time what was there and what was going on. It has all the events in it that are planned in that entire area, not just Fort Benton. Is it a pretty neat guide? Yeah, it's information on the hoof for those of us, because believe me, I've been to their summer event that they hold in June, and there's 4,000 and 5,000 people who drift in there from those communities. You're going to see everyone. So look for these. They're helpful. Or, Garfield County High School is just one of our most remote. It doesn't even have 2 people per square mile. And yet you'll see that they thought it was interesting enough to do a high school alumni piece of information from 1914 through 1939 through those early years. They have land register books that have been put out for them so that you get the land registers from long ago, but you also get land registers from the current years, courtesy of a couple of rural directory sources. So these are all kinds of things that you can use and that you should use. Heck, of course, you could use telephone directories. Why is this one interesting? Because it's northeast Montana and northwest Dakota, and it's a regional out of Scobie. So it's going to have both states in both places, because guess what? They crossed counties, and you're going to find information. You're going to find maps of local areas across the area that don't pay attention to the state boundary, and all kinds of things in there with all of their wonderful ads. Remember, they produce these through ads. Or here's the Samples Flats Church memoir, and the graves out there in Choteau County. This is Sample Flats. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It was a little church, and information has been collected about their Methodist cemetery there. It's not out online at this point that I know of. So if you were thinking of doing Find a Grave, there's a good one to maybe go to. Big Sandy Cemetery. A real note that says they've got it through 1995 and they updated it again to 2004. Well, that's good to know. Really, really good. Or the Warriors books. If you're not aware of it, when people came back from World War I first, most counties published a book celebrating their young men and women who had been lost in the war or who had gone to war. They also recorded things like all of the Red Cross clubs that participated to raise money and that also made bandages to send overseas. You're going to find your family in there. Choteau County's gone a step further and also done it for World War II. So they have it for both of them. And we're not any different than any of the other states around us. I found some of these in North Dakota. So they're just a great source. I'm going to remind you again, if you've got a teacher, you're always going to find that record of where they were in their life up to the point of that particular teacher register. This is Mrs. Stetson, and she's telling you all about herself that she's taught for 160 or more months. Think of how many years that is. But it tells you something about her that maybe her family didn't even know, or that you didn't know as a family member. It also tells you about the school again and about all the kids in the school. So and one had to stay in the teacher's register also always. One was given to the school board and one was given to the county superintendent. So you've got a fair chance of finding these records. Or teacher registers where you're looking and saying, can I find that where my great grandpa actually attended? Maybe I find out that even though he thought he was a graduate, he never did graduate officially. So I'm going to stop my screen share now and come back to you.